When Canada Post workers go on strike, the vast majority of letter mail just doesn't get delivered. Then think about packages. Canada Post figures with 55,000 workers on strike since mid-November.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
It's missed out on an estimated 10 million package deliveries. And Canada Post needs your business because it just announced a third quarter loss of
more than $300 million.
$315 million.
$315 million.
And the negotiator tasked with bringing the two sides together to find a resolution to this contract dispute.
Mediated talks between Canada Post and the union representing its workers have been suspended.
Yeah, they gave up. The two sides apparently weren't even on the same planet. And this is after days of direct mediated talks.
I'm extremely frustrated with this turn of events. These negotiations have not budged. In over 8 days under a special mediator.
So why is this negotiation proving so difficult? And how might it end? So how far apart is far apart? About 12.5%. Canada Post has proposed an 11.5% wage increase spread out over 4 years, whereas the union has asked for 24% over that same time period.
Unions are doing this everywhere. Inflation's been devastating for our members. They can't pay their groceries or their rent.
Postal workers have fallen far behind, as many people within the society have fallen behind. We've seen inflation go through the roof.
So let's look at inflation. If the goal of a pay increase is to beat inflation, and we peg it at its ideal target, 2% per year, that's 8% over 4 years, Canada Post's offer beats that. But when has inflation ever been at 2%, right? Well, last month it was exactly at 2%, and the month before it was actually lower at 1.6%. But take the whole year into account, and inflation so far in 2024 is 2.5%. Last year, 3.9%. The year before, 6.8%. And it was 3.4% the year before that. Altogether, that's a 16.6% increase in the cost of living over 4 years. In that sense, 11.5% doesn't seem to cut it, does it?
Solidarity!
With our members off for a week, we've already lost 2% of our annual wages. Any wage increase will not make up for that 2%, but we're fighting for the survival of good jobs for Canadians.
And 11.5% is on the low side of what public and private sector unions in general have negotiated the last few years. The federal government actually keeps track of major labor negotiations. And if we zero in on the transportation industry, which includes Canada Post, we can see the average annual wage settlement this year and the last reached as high as 4.2% per year. That equals, on average, a 16.8% wage increase over 4 years. And if you look at other prominent negotiations this year, there's certainly room to negotiate up. Take dock workers in Montreal, who are also federally regulated.
The Maritime Employers Association tabled what it called its final comprehensive offer on Thursday and locked out nearly 1,200 workers after they rejected it.
They were offered 12% over 4 years and rejected it, demanding instead 20% to match offers made to their counterparts in Halifax and Vancouver. It's not clear Montreal dock workers will get what they're asking for, but when it comes to Canada Post's side of the story, they have a very simple response to their union's wage demand. We're already broke. Canada Post has been hemorrhaging money for years. And I know this because I've gone through their annual financial statements. They're down $748 million last year alone. The year before that, $548 million. Minus $490 million, minus $779, minus $153, minus $276. Over the last 6 years, Canada Post has lost almost $3 billion. And unlike other crown corporations, this is a company that has to turn a profit because it doesn't get government money. Here's the state of their business in their own words. Letter mail volumes have eroded significantly. There has been a major decline in our cash position. Canada Post's financial situation is unsustainable. Its long-standing role is under significant threat, and we expect to fall below our required operating and reserve cash requirements by early 2025. That last one means they'll be out of money by early next year.
This is when Canada Post makes most of its money. So the rest of the year, if it's losing money, it's making money in these few weeks between kind of Black Friday and Christmas and New Year's.
And mail delivery is labor intensive. You need people making those rounds. And we can see in Canada Post's latest annual report, salaries and benefits make up the majority of all of their operating costs, almost $4.9 billion in 2023. That's almost 63% of their budget.
Essentially, the company has said it can't afford what the union is asking for.
And this brings us to Canada Post's other big problem, that over the last few years, they've lost the most lucrative part of their business.
The explosion of e-commerce that occurred during the pandemic caused the e-commerce companies to re-examine their cost of distribution. And they found it was too high from both Canada Post and the traditional couriers. So they sought alternatives, and the gig industry of delivery came into being at radically lower costs.
Pre-pandemic, Canada Post controlled 62% of the package delivery business in Canada. But smaller, nimbler companies swept in with an employee business model that was the opposite of Canada Post's. Low overhead, low cost, few benefits.
Financially, things are very challenging. The reality is things have moved so quickly in the last 2 years that the platform we've built in terms of increasing our volumes and parcels due to e-commerce has been chipped away by the competition.
And in Canada Post's own annual report, we are the only major carrier that does not offer regular 6-day-a-week delivery in major urban centers. Some competitors offer 7-day-a-week delivery nationally.
We didn't expect our market share to drop that quickly and for the competitors to take that much of the volume.
Parcels are the single most important way Canada Post makes money, about half of its total business. But every piece of this pie, parcels, letter mail, junk mail, they've all gotten smaller. The company wants to change that by expanding package deliveries into the weekend. But the union disagrees on exactly how to do that. And some experts think this might actually be the more important issue than wages.
The company says in order to even survive, it needs to be able to deliver 7 days a week.
Canada Post has a collective agreement that says you get double time on the weekend, which makes them even more uncompetitive. So what they're, to get around the problem, is they're saying we want to hire a whole bunch of part-time people at a much lower salary who will work on the weekend without time and a half.
Meanwhile, the union is saying they're really concerned that it might kind of cut into full-time jobs. They think that full-time employees should be able to take those weekend shifts.
The makeup of Canada Post workforce is something that both sides have fought fiercely over. According to the corporation, 95% of mail delivery teams right now are full-time. And the union doesn't want to see that number erode because even Canada Post itself admits to make weekend delivery a reality, it would need to rely on part-time workers who earn less money, have less benefits, and who may ultimately have fewer protections.
They want to create a part-time, low-wage, gigified workplace at a Crown corporation, and CUPW knows that that's not the best way for us to go. We do have the ability to do this work with full-time workers, and they already have the ability to do weekend delivery right now.
Unions are loath in everywhere to give up hard-won, fought rights and benefits at the negotiating table achieved in the past. It's this idea you don't go backward, you go forward. Canada Post is arguing, in essence, if we don't become competitive in parcels, it's going to be the death of Canada Post.
Meanwhile, every day that the strike goes on, Canada Post's financial position gets worse and worse.
We could post a record loss this year. The fourth quarter is where we make our money. It's our busiest time of year. Nothing coming in, no revenue, no parcels. Those parcels are going elsewhere and having a huge impact on Canada Post, as well as the rest of the country as small businesses and charities try and scramble and find alternatives.
Now, wages and weekends are just two issues on the table, and this story keeps moving. As I record this, the latest turn, Canada Post has begun laying off striking workers, which they say is in line with the Canada Labour Code. The union says it's a scare tactic. But what's abundantly clear here is that the two sides appear unwilling or unable to meet in the middle. And a freeze in talks could not have come at a worse time for Canada Post or the people who rely on it during the holidays.